Welcome and welcome back, fiber friends, to yet another episode of the Wool to Gold podcast. Today, we're going to be spinning some self-striping yarn. So if you've been following along with the podcast for a while, you know I recently put out a how to spin a gradient yarn tutorial. These two tutorials are going to be strikingly similar to one another because if I'm being honest with you, the major difference between something like a gradient versus spinning a self-striping yarn or a variegated yarn really is just how rapidly the colors change. So with a gradient yarn, just as the name implies, the color gradually changes very slowly. Whereas with a self-striping yarn or a variegated yarn, the color changes tend to be more rapid and abrupt, and they tend to happen more frequently as well. Now, you can design self-striping yarns to be better suited for like a sock project, so the stripes are more rapid and the color changes more often, or you can also design self-striping and variegated yarns more for like sweater design, something larger where your stripes are not changing as rapidly. You have like larger sections of stripes. I've been wanting to spin up a Tweety style yarn as well for a super long time. So today we're going to be spinning up this Alk&Me Braid. The colorway is Romeite. It's Romeite. And it is their tweed blend, so it is 89% Shiniko wool, 6% acrylic, 5% rayon. The wool is super soft, it's 20.4 microns, and this is about 4 ounces. I love all of the colors in this, so I'm really excited to highlight each of them in the striped yarn. As always, we have to start by taking apart this braid. Once we undo it, the process, again, is going to be very, very similar to the gradient spin that we did very recently. We're going to be spinning it from top to bottom without too many breaks, assuming that I want to put it all on one bobbin, which I kind of do. I would like to make one big skein of self-striping yarn, but I'm looking forward to highlighting each of these colors, which is the benefit of using something like this for self-striping yarn. So if I was to spin this in a fractal, it could turn out really beautiful. It could also turn out a little muddy. There are a lot of colors going on here with different relationships to one another on the color wheel, and my color sense is not always the best. So instead of risking kind of losing a lot of my favorite colors that are represented here in a fractal spin, I would much rather highlight each of them individually in a self-striping yarn instead. I just wanted to talk a little bit about why I choose certain braids for certain projects, because people have been asking a lot about how I decide which braid goes to which project, and a lot of it just has to do with like which parts of the braid I want to highlight, if I want the color scheme to seem more like muddied and mixed to get a certain color from a distance, or if I want the colors to each individually be highlighted in something like a gradient or a self-striping yarn. There are also ways of spinning this to make different art yarns to highlight different colors and different aspects of this fiber, but we're not going to touch too much on that today. Alright, and after pulling apart this braid, I am so glad that I made the decision to make this a self-striping yarn. I was correct. Just by looking at the braid, I could kind of get the idea that it was very short bursts and intervals of each of these colors, but I was 100% on the nose with that. I think this is going to make a really great self-striping yarn as a result. Again, because we have these really short sections of color, I just think that this will highlight each of the colors the best. And I'm going to show you guys a little bit of the process of getting this actually set up on the wheel. But as I mentioned before, this is a pretty straightforward spin, just like a gradient, mostly because we don't need to take this braid apart really any further. We're just going to spin it from this end all the way to the other end. Frankly, the hardest part is deciding which end to start with. This is also a really good opportunity, once again, just like with a gradient, to practice spinning across the fiber as opposed to down the side. I will remind all of you that one of my favorite techniques for avoiding accidentally spinning down the side and messing up your, beautifully variegated yarn or beautifully self-striping yarn is to break it down into pieces. Now, I am pretty good at spinning just across, back and forth across the top at this point, but what I would suggest for really anyone is to split it right where the color change gets pretty dramatic and start with just this piece, right? Because Flipping around this like whole piece of comb top is not only like super cumbersome, but you're also just asking for your fiber to get a little bit messy, a little bit disheveled, possibly felted if you're, I don't know, squishing it or accidentally sitting on it or something like that. There's lots of things that can happen to your fiber, and so it's better, in my opinion, just to pull it off and do it in pieces. Now, if you followed along for the gradient yarn, you know that that one turned out to be sport weight, which was a little bit lighter than I wanted it to be, and so I can't remember if I spun it at like a 15:1 or 16:1 ratio. It was higher than what we're going to spin this yarn at. That's what matters. So this yarn I did put on a slightly larger whirl for in order to get that like DK or worsted weight that I'm kind of shooting for, and I put it on a 10.5:1 ratio, so I'm hoping that that helps us get a slightly thicker yarn. And I've already got my leader here fed through my orifice, so it's really just a matter of starting. Alright, so actual human check-in. I wanted to do like a check-in where I actually talk to you guys a little bit about the spin. It's kind of flying by. That's why I haven't been doing real check-ins, because it's only been like, I don't know, 3 days, and I have just been spinning up a storm and getting this done really, really quickly. It's been really fun. I don't know. I find the quick stripes of color to actually be really fun to spin. I usually avoid things that have like, I usually avoid like hand-dyed comb top that it has these like shorter intervals of color, because I don't usually spin something like a self-striping yarn. But I forgot how fun something like this is to spin. Like, it just goes very quickly because you're like, oh, I'll just do like one section, and before you know it, like the section of orange is gone and you're already on the pink, and you're like, oh, well, I might as well do like a little bit more. And that's why I feel like the spin has just been flying by. Also, complete side note, but does the bobbin not remind you of a salmon? I'm gonna bring it closer to you guys. I feel like the tweed effect, I don't know, it's giving salmon in a good way. I love that this whole spin has been giving like gone fishing, and I really love it. Okay, and as you can see, we have a finished full bobbin of singles. You can kind of guess where this is going in terms of how this yarn is going to look, because I get a lot of questions on this channel about like, how do you know which braids should be fractals or which should be self-striping yarns? And I'm gonna do a whole episode where I kind of go like a little bit more in depth into what that process looks like. But if my singles came out looking something like this, and I didn't know what I was gonna do with the singles, I would definitely consider making a self-striping yarn, because you can visually see like you're gonna have some orange stripes and some pink into some yellow and then some teal and some blue. Whereas if you were to make a plying ball and ply this in on itself as like a 2-ply yarn, it'd still be a pretty beautiful yarn. Like, I think these colors are just really like wood stocky and again salmony, gone fishing. It reminds me of those like those hats that were really popular with like dads in like, I don't know, the early 2000s. I'm gonna insert a photo over here of which hats I'm talking about, but like the color scheme, that's what this reminds me of. So like it could be a 2-ply yarn that I ply in on itself, but more than likely these stripes are not going to match up, because they didn't really match up when I held the roving, you know, like side by side into 2 pieces. I could tell those stripes weren't really going to line up with one another, so you're just gonna get a little bit more of a muddied yarn, as opposed to, again, chain plying will result in your plying up against those like next, I don't know, yard, 3 yards, whatever you want to call it, and so you're getting more of like a color block. Like, it's going to be all orange, and then maybe there'll be like 1 or 2 sections that are a little orange, a little pink, but it'll mostly be like stripes. And then the thing about a self-striping yarn is I do feel like there are lots of projects that specifically call for like gradient yarns, color changing yarns, self-striping yarns. I think there's, I don't know, specifically knitting patterns come to mind in terms of like things you can do with self-striping yarn. Obviously there's also crochet stuff you can do with self-striping yarn. I mostly crochet. I don't really knit with my yarn. But yeah, that's enough chit chat though. Obviously, it's time to chain ply this bad boy, right? Because we are making a self-striping yarn. So once again, I'm going to show you guys some demo video of me actually doing the chain plying. If you're not interested in that, use the timestamps. You can skip it. I'm going to try to do it in from a few different angles, just like last time. So if you didn't really feel like you understood how I was chain plying from my last video, check out the footage in this video. Maybe it'll help. Again, I am not necessarily a professional. I'm just showing you guys how I chain ply. I don't hate chain plying, but I don't love or necessarily relish the opportunity to chain ply something. This won't be bad because the singles are thicker, okay? Again, I spun it at a 10.5 to 1 ratio, which recently has just been my favorite on my Shack Matchless, but it definitely resulted in a slightly thicker single than the singles that I spun for the gradient yarn, which turned out to be a sport weight. So fingers crossed that we have like at least a DK, okay? At least a DK weight. Alrighty, and I'm just going to show you guys a little demo of how I set up the wheel for chain plying. So as you can see, I have our lead and I have our singles from our bobbin. I'm feeding the singles through the lead and making another loop, essentially, like a small loop. I'm leaving some space and knotting it at sort of the very top, and I'll show you guys that in a moment. Once you have that loop formed, you're just going to feed your singles through that loop to form another loop. If you crochet, it is going to look strikingly similar to a crochet loop because essentially it is. And that's how we form the 3 plies. Once you start feeding that next loop through the first loop, which is only 2 plies, you start to form a 3-ply yarn. Getting this tensioned right can be tricky. As you can see, I even had to, fiddle with it quite a bit to get it correct initially. But once you get the hang of it and you get into the rhythm of it, chain plying is really not as difficult as it seems at first. And as always, I'm going to show you guys a demonstration from a few different angles. I think it's easiest from this angle to see how you turn it into a 3-ply yarn. You can really see the 3 plies coming together here. And then before I show you guys what it looks like once I put a yarn like this onto the Niddy Noddy, I did want to highlight that the way you know you've done this right is if your bobbin, like your finished bobbin, looks kind of similar to your singles bobbin in that there are distinct stripes of colors like going through it. Yeah, I can tell that this is going to be a successful self-striping yarn before even like washing it or swatching it or something like that, just by the way that it looks here on the bobbin. And then this is my Niddy Noddy, well, one of my Niddy Noddies. This one comes apart, so it's definitely one of my favorites. It has like a 2-yard and a 1-yard setting. Today we have a full bobbin of yarn, so I am going to use this 2-yard setting, and I'm probably going to show you guys like a sped up clip of what it looks like when I load all of the yarn onto the Niddy Noddy. How I usually start is I just like take one end and I will like slide it underneath here, right? Because these pieces come apart, so there's like a little bit of space. I'll slide the piece in there and then it just holds it for me while I can continue wrapping the entire thing. When I first started using a Niddy Noddy, I will say I wasn't always the best at like following the same pattern throughout the whole thing, and like that's kind of how the Niddy Noddy works. Like it only works if you follow the same like pattern on the way you're hooking the yarn around it like the entire time. So do try to be conscious, and like the first few times you use a Niddy Noddy, I really recommend going pretty slow. Okay, so here's our yarn all wrapped up on the Niddy Noddy. As you can see, it looks pretty rainbow, pretty variegated. It reminds me a lot of like a hand-dyed variegated yarn, but instead of having the wool dyed once it was spun, this skein was dyed in the wool and then spun up. So if you ever see that like on a yarn label, like you see the words dyed in the wool, it essentially means that the wool was dyed first and then it was blended up, or sometimes it isn't blended up and it's just spun the way it is. It kind of depends. But essentially it just means that the wool was dyed first and then spun, as opposed to being spun and then dyed. I made our little tag here. I'm calling this Dancing Bears because it's giving Grateful Dead Dancing Bears, okay? I don't know, do you see it? I see it. I feel like it's just hippy-dippy, tie-dye, fun colors. I really like this. And just a reminder, this skein is a tweed blend, so it is 89% Shiniko, I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it. Shiniko wool, 6% acrylic, and 5% rayon. I have to say, I do think that the weight is definitely closer to what I wanted it to be, especially once I wash it. I think it's gonna bloom at least a little bit. The way you take it off of the Niddy Noddy is you just take one of the sides off. It's not super complicated. And if you did everything correctly, you should just have a big loop like this. There shouldn't be any like spare, you know, strings that only made it like halfway across or anything like that. You might have to rehank it if that was the result that you got. But once it looks like this, you literally just twist it up. Give it a twist, and you let it twist in on itself. And that's how you make the like hank shape that everybody is super duper familiar with. But before we do that, we do have to wash and thwack that. So I'm going to show you guys how I do that process as well today. And as always, just a reminder that washing is a non-negotiable step. Okay, thwacking, totally negotiable. You don't have to thwack your yarn. That is like very much your own choice. Some people don't want the yarn to be more woolen. They don't want to bloom the yarn as much. They would really prefer to not thwack the yarn. Totally fine. You need to wash your yarn, okay? You gotta wash it. It's been, every inch of it has been through your fingers, probably multiple times. If you're making a plied yarn, definitely multiple times. And even if you're washing your hands before you sit down to spin every single time, which, let's be honest, like I do it probably 80% of the time, but there are some times where I just like kind of sit down and spin after like right after like crocheting or something like that, and I'm not gonna like wash my hands in between, okay? And so things get on the yarn. You gotta wash your yarn. You don't have to use like a super fancy soap or anything like that. If you want soap recommendations, I did a whole video on soap, so I'm gonna link that down below. But anyway, let's get to soaking and thwacking. Actually, what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna go to the gym and then we're gonna soak this yarn because it's a hand-dyed yarn, and I've actually never spun anything from this specific hand dyer before. I don't really know if the colors are going to run at all. And with something like this, because again, we have these like distinct different colors and stripes, I don't want the colors to run into one another. And And as a result, I don't want to leave it sitting in a thing of warm water while I'm at the gym, and I could potentially be gone for like an hour and a half. So instead, I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to come back. We're going to soak it probably for like, I'm going to start with 20 minutes. We're going to check in on it, see if any of the colors are running. If they're not running at all, we're going to let it sit for another 20 minutes. If they are starting to run, we're going to give it another 5, and then we're going to drain all the water out. We're going to squeeze it out in a towel. I'll show you that process if I can remember to film it. I'm sorry, I always forget to film it. And then we're going to thwack it, which looks really silly, but I am going to film for you today, so you're welcome, because I'm gonna look a little goofy when I'm doing it. Alrighty, so today for washing, we're gonna be using some eucalyptus, and you don't need a lot. You really only need, like, I don't know, not even a whole tablespoon. I always put too much on accident. I'm trying to be really careful here, oh my gosh. Yeah, that's fine, that's good. Just a little dollop. And then once the water is nice and warm, you're just going to start filling it up. Make sure all of your soap is mixed in. Alright, so we have our bowl of warm soapy water. We have our yarn. Okay, at this point, I'm not as concerned about, like, felting the yarn, which is to say, like, I do push the yarn into the water, but I do so gently. Like, I don't want to actually felt it, especially because I was doing some, I already forgot the pronunciation of the wool. Shiniko. I did do some research on Shiniko wool, and it is technically a merino wool. It's a fine wool, so it definitely is maybe prone to felting just like any other fine wool, and so I'm gentle about it. But once it's submerged into the water, we're gonna let this soak, and again, we're gonna check in about 20 minutes, see how the water looks, see if any of the colors are running. If they are, we're gonna take it out of the bath. If it's not, we're gonna let it soak for probably another 20. You can hear Bobo whining in the background because he wants to hang out on the deck, but he's not allowed. You're not allowed to hang out on the deck, and you know why, because you keep eating bees. He keeps eating bees. And he keeps getting stung. He's gotten stung like 4 times. He doesn't care is the issue. This is one thing about Bo is that he's great about getting shots at the vet. Like, he literally can get 3 shots in a day. He doesn't even notice. He doesn't even flinch. He's a pleasure to have as, like, at a vet practice. But he isn't easily deterred from things like eating bees by, like, you know, repercussions like pain, unfortunately, because you're just a tank, right? You're just a big tank. Okay, so let's see if we can take a peek at the water. I actually don't see a ton of running color, if I'm not mistaken. That's pretty clear water. That's pretty good. I'm gonna let it soak for another 10 minutes at least. All right, so we have our bowl of yarn here. Most of the water has been drained out. I'm gonna take it out and I'm gonna put it on this towel, and then I'm going to roll it up and gently squish the water out. So lie that out like that. I'm gonna fold it up on both sides. And then I usually just roll it like this, and then I'll roll it the other way to kind of compress that water out, squish it down, and then unroll the whole thing. And the reason I really want to squish all the water I can out of it, not just to speed up drying, but it also makes thwacking a lot easier. I don't think that thwacking, like, soaking wet yarn is a super good idea. It should be just, like, a little bit damp. But as you can see, it's, like, not dripping, and it's not nearly as heavy as when I initially took it out of the water. All right, so people think I'm exaggerating when I say, like, you're literally just beating this against the ground. But you're just gonna, I pick a starting point. I usually pick where one of the butterfly ties are, just to, like, keep track and make sure I get the entire thing. And then you just start. And again, the thwacking will make the yarn a lot more even. It will also add a little bit of air into the yarn. And here we have it, fiber friends, fully dried, completely washed and clean. This beautiful skein of self-striping yarn. I think this came out fantastic. I have to say, it came out a lot cushier than I expected it to. Like, it really does have some nice air to it, which I'm not used to with merino wools. Like, one of my main things about merino wool that I don't usually love, specifically like a superwash merino, is the drape factor. But this has a nice, like, fluff and air to it. I really like the way I spun it, and it is 10 WPI, 10 wraps per inch, which essentially means it is a worsted weight yarn, which is exactly what I was shooting for. I think I'm going to be immediately spinning another worsted weight yarn, kind of similar to this. Maybe not a self-striping, but like I want to do another hand-dyed braid yarn that I do worsted. I love this. I think it came out super duper awesome. And I do think this is going to be listed on the shop sometime soon. So keep your eye out if you do want this skein for yourself. Anyway, fiber friends, once again, we have another successful skein of yarn. Thank you so much for coming along and watching this little like tutorial slash just like a make with me, essentially. I really enjoy making things like this. I really love like getting to show you guys the process from the very beginning to the very end. It's really satisfying. And I hope you guys had fun too. So thank you again for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next episode of the Wool to Gold podcast.